The sound of shattered crystal echoed across the Christmas dinner table, and the room fell silent. The red ribbon on the expensive wine bottle slipped off and landed on the cold tile floor. Olivia stood up abruptly, her face flushed red, her sharp voice cutting through the bright room. "Mom, stop pretending to be the victim. We don't need your pathetic pension money." Margaret Turner didn't move. She was 70 years old, her silver hair neatly tied back, her thin hands resting on the oak table. On her finger, the old wedding ring glimmered faintly in the light from the fireplace. Every eye turned to her, waiting for a reaction. Derek, her son-in-law, smirked with a tone laced in mockery. "You should know better. Mother, don't ruin the mood. From now on, you don't have to contribute anymore. Take care of yourself. We've got $60 million to live on." A long, frozen silence filled the room. The fire crackled softly. The light reflected off Margaret's calm face as she slowly lifted her glass of water. Her voice was low, steady, and gentle, like a breeze sliding through a window pane. $60 million. How interesting. But are you sure you've checked whose name is actually written on that ticket? Derek's smile faltered. Olivia's eyes widened. Her lips parted to speak, but Margaret had already risen and quietly stepped out onto the porch, where the sea breeze carried the salt and chill of December. She had known this moment would come. Justice, though slow, always finds its way. 3 weeks earlier, Hollow Bay had been as peaceful as ever. Margaret woke early, brewed a cup of chamomile tea, and walked to the small corner grocery store where she'd been buying lottery tickets for 30 years. The glass door was fogged with morning dew, and the bell chimed softly. "Same numbers as always," Mrs. Turner, the young clerk, asked with a friendly smile as he printed the ticket. "The same Sam. 7 for our wedding day. 12 for my husband's birthday. 22 for the day Olivia was born, 31 for our first house, and 18 for the year we planted the oak tree in the yard." Each number carried a memory, each memory a mark etched into the heart of a woman who had loved, lost, and endured. She carefully slipped the ticket into her old leather wallet next to the faded photograph of her late husband. "Hope today's your lucky day," Sam said as he waved her off. Margaret smiled, never imagining his words would turn prophetic. Back home, she passed through the garden where Derek had hired workers to renovate it. He called it an investment to increase property value. In truth, she knew they were quietly preparing a small basement apartment for Mother to live more comfortably, a polite way of saying to move her out. Olivia had once promised, "It's only temporary, Mom. After Dad passed, I just didn't want you to be alone." But that promise had vanished like smoke once Derek moved into the house. In the early months, Derek still called her Mom Maggie, and Olivia joked, calling her our adorable housemate. Then everything changed. They began leaving notes on the table. "Mom, remember to pay the electric bill. You forgot your part again." Bit by bit, she went from being their mother to a tenant, then to a maid. She cleaned the house, cooked meals, and cared for her grandchildren while Olivia worked and Derek was busy with important deals. One afternoon, she overheard Derek on the phone saying, "Good thing my mother-in-law's pension covers the property tax this year. Once we win the lottery, I'll pay her back, or maybe not." She stood silently behind the door, her chest tightening, not because of the money, but because of the contempt hidden beneath his tone. But Margaret Turner was not a weak woman. She had spent her life raising her child alone, surviving 2 bouts of cancer and a hurricane that destroyed their first home. She had once told her students, "Art doesn't save us from pain, but it teaches us to turn it into strength." And now she needed that lesson more than ever. That night, when Derek laughed proudly, declaring, "We're millionaires," Olivia kissed him under the flashing lights of their friends' cameras. Margaret stood quietly in the corner, still holding her glass of lemonade, listening to them discuss buying a new mansion, hiring a private chef, and sending her to a luxurious nursing home so she could be well taken care of. Every word was a knife. Olivia, the daughter who once held her hand through every storm, now avoided her gaze and murmured, "You know, I just want what's best for you, Mom. You need peace." Margaret only nodded, hiding the tremor in her hands. As Derek raised his glass in celebration, she suddenly remembered the lottery ticket in her wallet, and a thought flashed through her mind like lightning across a dark sky. Perhaps her justice was finally arriving. She went upstairs, opened the drawer of her wooden desk, and took out the ticket. The lamplight glowed across the familiar numbers, the ones that had followed her for 3 decades. A faint smile appeared on her lips. Sometimes God doesn't send miracles. He simply waits for us to be strong enough to claim what we deserve. And the next morning, while Derek was still asleep, drunk on wine and victory, Margaret left the house wearing her gray cardigan and carrying her purse. She was going to check the results, not for the money, but for something far greater, the truth. She didn't know that within just a few hours, all of their lives would change forever. The morning was still young, and a thick mist blanketed the small coastal street. The Hollow Bay Mart convenience store glowed faintly under its yellow lights. Margaret stepped inside, the chill trailing behind her damp shoes. Sam, the young clerk, was changing the lottery machine's paper roll. He looked up and smiled. "Out this early, Mrs. Turner." She nodded slightly, her voice calm and steady as always. "Just a habit, Sam. Same numbers today," he joked. "Maybe luck will really knock on your door this time." Margaret smiled softly, but in her eyes was a quiet melancholy. Those numbers had followed her entire life: 7 for their wedding day, 12 for Thomas's birthday, 22 for the day Olivia was born, 31 for their first home, and 18 for the year they planted the oak tree in the yard, the one still standing though he was gone. When Sam finished printing the ticket, she gently flipped it over and signed her name in neat black ink, Margaret Turner. Then she tucked it into her wallet, carefully placing it between their old wedding photo and a picture of Olivia at 10. On the way home, the sea wind was biting cold. Hollow Bay was still shrouded in fog, the gray rooftops blurred like brushstrokes in an oil painting. She stopped in front of the house where she now lived with her daughter and son-in-law. That house had once been Thomas's pride. Now it was merely a symbol of someone else's power. Derek's sports car sat gleaming in the driveway like it was showing off. Through the window, she saw him in the living room phone, pressed to his ear, voice firm. "No, I told you I'll invest once I get the money. Don't call me again until then." His tone was sharp and cold. Margaret quietly walked into the kitchen. On the table lay a note from Olivia, Mom. "Please send another $500 for this month's electric bill." Derek said, "Our money is stuck in the joint account." "Thank you, Mom. Love you." The words "love you" tilted weakly across the page as if written out of obligation. She sighed. Since moving in, she had played the part of the kind, helpful mother. But with each passing month, each new bill, she felt herself slowly turning into someone indebted within her own home, a home she had helped pay for. When Thomas passed away, Olivia had said, "You can't live alone. Mom, come stay with us." Back then, the invitation had sounded like salvation. Now it felt like a trap. During breakfast, Olivia, still in her nightgown with her hair in disarray, was texting while saying, "Mom, Derek, and I have a dinner party at a friend's house tonight. Could you watch the kids for us?" Margaret set down her teacup, her voice soft but firm. "Don't you think I deserve a night off?" Olivia looked up startled, then forced a quick laugh. "Oh, of course, but you know the babysitter's busy this week. I'll make it up to you later, okay?" The word "make it up" sounded more like paying for a service. Derek walked in crisp white shirt tie, perfectly knotted. He placed a hand on his wife's shoulder and said loudly, "Don't stress her out. Mom loves spending time with the kids. It saves everyone some money." Then he turned to Margaret, smirking. "You know, some people pay hundreds for babysitters. You helping us out is really generous." Margaret looked straight into his eyes. Her calm gaze was so steady it made Derek falter for a brief second. "Sometimes people forget that kindness has its limits," she said softly. He laughed it off, pretending not to hear. That afternoon, after dropping the kids at school, Margaret stopped at the seaside park. The waves crashed against the stone embankment and seagulls cried above. She sat on a wooden bench, opened her wallet, and looked at the freshly printed ticket. The pale morning light fell across its surface. Each number was a healed wound, but the scars remained. She remembered the last evening with Thomas when he'd held her hand, his breath fading. If one day they forget your worth, remember that justice never stays silent. It only waits for the right moment. Back then, she thought he was dreaming aloud. Now his words rang in her head with painful clarity. When she returned home, she heard Olivia laughing in the living room. Her daughter was on the phone saying, "If we really win the jackpot, Derek said we'll rebuild the whole house. Mom will have her own place in the basement, really comfortable." Margaret froze at the doorway. The same daughter she had raised the little girl she once taught to paint her first flowers was now talking about confining her to the basement as if it were some generous plan. She turned away silently. Inside her, a small flame began to burn, not of anger, but the cold, determined fire of someone who knew she was about to reclaim what was rightfully hers. That night, the wind howled and rain hammered the roof. Derek sat on the couch, beer in hand, watching TV. Olivia was upstairs picking out a dress for the weekend party. Margaret sat in the corner, knitting quietly, pretending not to hear their conversation. "What do you think about buying a new car when we win?" Olivia asked. "A car? A new house? A trip to Italy?" Derek replied, half joking, though his eyes were serious, "And your mother will have her own room in the basement." Olivia giggled, resting her head on his shoulder. "As long as Mom's happy." Margaret looked up at them, the light from the lamp glinting across her face, bright yet cold. "If you truly want me to be happy," she said quietly, "then wait until you find out who the real lucky one is." Her words made them both pause, though Derek merely shrugged, not understanding. That night in her room, Margaret sat by the window. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the moon peeked through the clouds. She opened her wallet and gazed at the ticket. A single tear fell not from sorrow, but from the certainty that fate was about to turn. The next morning, the phone rang. Sam's voice trembled on the other end. "Mrs. Turner, have you checked the results? 7, 12, 22, 31, 18, they match." Margaret said nothing. Then Sam gasped. "You won $60 million." She placed the phone down and looked at the ticket in her hand. For a moment, every sound disappeared. All that remained was the sound of her heartbeat, steady, slow, powerful. Justice had just knocked on her door, and this time she was ready to open it wide. The house on the cliff was glowing in the morning sunlight, yet inside the air was cold and heavy, as if someone had just died. Margaret stood at the kitchen counter holding a cup of tea, her eyes fixed on the sea. The silver waves crashed against the rocks, echoing a low, mournful sound. Inside her sleeve, she kept the lottery ticket folded neatly like a sacred secret she wasn't ready to reveal. Upstairs, Olivia was laughing on the phone. "Yes, baby, yes, 60 million, Derek's checking the numbers again. It can't be wrong. My mom has the ticket, but it's our money anyway." From the kitchen below, Margaret heard every word. Each syllable struck her chest like a blow. Our money. They hadn't even asked who had bought the ticket. She sat down, took a sip of tea, her hand trembling slightly. Then came Derek's voice, sharp and demanding. "Olivia, come down here. Where did your mother put the ticket?" The bedroom door burst open. Olivia came running down, her hair, messy eyes shining like someone who had just touched heaven. "Mom! Mom, did you check the results? We won. Where's the ticket? Where did you put it?" Margaret set her cup down and calmly asked, "Who do you mean by we, Olivia?" "Well, us, this family, of course." "Derek said you always buy the ticket with money from the shared fund." "What shared fund?" Margaret asked, her voice soft, but her tone as sharp as steel. Olivia froze for a moment, then glanced at Derek, who was walking down the stairs holding his phone. On the screen glowed the winning numbers. Derek laughed loudly, pretending to sound friendly. "Mom, it's simple. We live here together, we share everything, so obviously everyone in the house has a share. Where's the ticket? I just need to confirm it." Margaret slowly stood up, walked to the cabinet, opened the wooden drawer, and pulled out the ticket. She held it between her fingers, lifting it toward the light. The sunlight streamed through the window, shining on the black printed numbers. Both Olivia and Derek held their breath. "Here it is," she said, her voice calm and low. "And yes, it's the winning ticket for $60 million. Olivia screamed, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Oh my God, Mom, I can't believe it. We're finally free from debt." Derek snatched the ticket from her hand and stared at it. "Perfect. We're going to the lottery headquarters today." Margaret didn't stop him. She wanted to see how far they would go before realizing they owned nothing. "We're going?" she asked. Derek turned, not noticing the sharp glint in her eyes. "Of course. You live here. The ticket's in my house. We're family. We should share this joy together." Margaret walked toward them, her heels clicking steadily against the wooden floor. "Derek," she said, "I bought this ticket at Hollow Bay Mart with my own money and I signed my name on the back. This ticket belongs to the person whose name is written there." Olivia stayed silent. Her eyes flickered a flash of fear before disappearing as Derek gave a mocking smile. "Sure, but there's no law against sharing, right? I'm your son-in-law, Olivia's your daughter." "You're not seriously planning to keep all of this money for yourself, are you?" Margaret looked at him for a long moment, then gave a faint, unreadable smile. "Do you really think money is the only issue here?" The room went still. Olivia grabbed her husband's arm, her voice shaky. "Derek, please don't start anything. Mom just needs time." He pulled his arm free and turned back to Margaret, his tone rising. "Time. If you take that ticket, you won't even know what to do with it. That's a huge amount of money. I can help you invest it. We could buy a mansion, start a business, hire lawyers. You just need to give me the authorization." Margaret laughed softly, the sound dry and brittle, as it echoed through the elegant house. "You talk as if I were a child who needs guidance. Unfortunately, Derek, I've taught hundreds of children how to stand on their own. I don't need anyone holding my hand." Olivia's breathing quickened. "Mom." Derek didn't mean it that way. "He just wants to help." "Help," Margaret interrupted. "Since I moved in here, do you remember what that word has meant? Cooking, cleaning, babysitting, paying bills. All those things I did out of love. And how did you repay that love? By counting every penny of my pension." Derek stayed silent. Anger flashed in his eyes, but he forced himself to stay composed. "You've misunderstood me, Mom. I was just thinking about what's best for everyone." "What's best for everyone?" Margaret repeated. "You mean the plan to send me to that luxury senior home you mentioned last night, so I could be taken care of better?" Olivia's face turned pale. "You were eavesdropping on us." Margaret looked straight at her daughter. "No, I just happened to be nearby, but it seems God wanted me to hear every word." No one spoke. Only the sound of the waves crashing against the cliffs filled the silence. Derek took a deep breath and tried to soften his tone. "All right, Mom. If you felt insulted, I apologize. But let's be realistic. You don't know how to invest. You don't understand the law. If you hold on to this money, someone will just take advantage of you. Let me handle it. I know how to make it grow." Margaret stepped closer, standing directly in front of him. Her voice was calm but steady. "You might know money, Derek, but I know people. And trust me, you're making a very big mistake about the person standing in front of you." Derek opened his mouth to argue, but her eyes stopped him cold. Then Margaret turned away, gripping the ticket tightly, her voice quiet but firm. "We'll go to the lottery office together. But remember this, there's only one signature on this ticket, and it isn't yours." She walked out of the room, leaving Olivia frozen in place, while Derek clenched his fists so tightly that his nails cut into his palms, drawing blood. Outside, the waves crashed violently against the cliffs, echoing the heartbeat of the woman who had just reclaimed the right to her own life. That afternoon, the wind from the sea blew so fiercely that the window panes trembled. Inside the house, the air felt heavy, as if someone had sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Derek and Olivia sat together on the sofa, while Margaret stood across from them, holding a piece of paper that Ashley Derek's accountant friend had just sent over. It was a household financial contribution agreement, written in cold, formal language, filled with terms like shared expenses, proportional contributions, and payment obligations. The final figure, printed in bold, was $1,200 per month, the exact amount of Margaret's pension. "You expect me to sign this?" Margaret asked calmly, though her eyes were so cold that Derek felt a chill run down his spine. Olivia tried to ease the tension. "Mom, it's just for transparency to avoid misunderstandings. Derek thinks if everything is clear, we'll all get along better." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Clear, get along. You don't truly understand those words yet, Olivia. What's clear is that I'm being charged to live in the very house I helped pay for. And getting along means my son-in-law threatens to kick me out if I don't sign this paper." Olivia's face went pale. Derek took a deep breath, keeping his tone even. "Mom, this is just practical. You use the electricity, water, kitchen, laundry, and when the kids are here, you use the shared space. I just want to split the costs fairly." Margaret let out a weary but sharp smile. "Costs fine. Then tell me, how many hours a week do I spend watching your children so you and Olivia can go out? How many meals have I cooked? How many times have I taken out the trash, watered the plants, ironed your clothes? Are any of those listed in your agreement?" No one answered. The only sound was the slow ticking of the clock on the wall. Margaret placed the paper on the table, her voice low and dry like sand. "Very well. I'll sign it. But don't forget, everything you do today will come back to you sooner or later." Derek nodded, a brief smile of victory flashing across his face. "Of course, Mom. That's for the best." That night, while the house slept, Margaret sat alone in her small upstairs room. The warm light from the desk lamp cast deep shadows across her lined face. She opened the drawer and pulled out an old leather notebook, her expense journal since the day she'd moved in. Every page was filled with meticulous notes, electric bills, groceries, medicine supplies for her grandchildren, even the days she'd helped Derek pay off temporary expenses when he was short on cash. Next to each entry, her neat handwriting read, June 10th. Olivia said Derek needed to borrow $400. Promised to repay. Never did. Those numbers, those small notes, had now become silent evidence of how she had been taken advantage of. Outside the window, the waves whispered restlessly, the wind tapping against the bars like a rhythm for her solitude. She thought of Thomas, her late husband, the man who had once taught art to children beside her. He used to say people aren't poor because they lack money, but because they lack kindness. She had believed that, and that belief was what had betrayed her. The next day, Derek brought a contractor to inspect the basement. Margaret heard the noise and went downstairs. The man in a hard hat raised a blueprint. "Mr. Derek said we'll be moving your room down here, ma'am. You'll have a small kitchen, a private bathroom, completely separated from the upstairs." "Separated," she repeated with a faint smile. "Sounds like I'm a hazard." Derek quickly interjected. "No, Mom, that's not it. I just thought you'd want privacy. The upstairs room is small and close to the kids' rooms. Down here it's quieter." Margaret nodded slowly, her voice still calm. Yes, quiet, distant, closed off, far from the sunlight. Perfect for someone who's no longer seen as part of the family. Just then, Olivia came home from work, overheard the conversation, and pulled her mother aside in the kitchen, her voice low. "Mom, please don't make this harder. Derek only wants what's best for you. You know how stressed he's been about money." Margaret looked at her daughter, those same beautiful eyes she remembered from years ago, but now clouded by the shadow of the man she'd married. "Olivia," she said slowly, "when your father was alive, what did he teach you?" Olivia bit her lip. "That money can't buy happiness." "That's right," Margaret said, gripping her hand, her voice trembling with emotion. "But now I see you're trading happiness for money." Olivia pulled her hand away, avoiding her gaze. "You don't understand, Mom. You can't survive without money these days." Margaret looked at her daughter, who now felt like a stranger, her eyes heavy with sorrow. "I understand," she said quietly. "But you don't yet understand the price you'll pay for greed." That night, Derek spoke with Olivia in the living room, his voice low but still clear through the thin wall. "Once the basement's finished, she'll live there. Less contact, less trouble. We'll finally have our own space." "But I still feel guilty," Olivia whispered. "Guilty. Did you forget who's paying for her to live here? Once we have the money, you'll finally have the life you've always wanted." Margaret sat in her room, her hands clenched tightly. Those words no longer hurt her the way they used to. They only confirmed what she already knew. Her kindness had run out. The next morning, she walked to her usual store. The sky was gray, a light drizzle falling on the empty streets. When Sam handed her the new ticket, she signed her name, her eyes filled with a new, steady resolve. "Good luck, Mrs. Turner," Sam said. Margaret replied softly, "No need for luck, Sam. Luck doesn't come to those who beg for it. It comes to those who've endured enough." She slipped the ticket into her wallet and turned toward the door. Outside, the waves were rising wild and white, as if preparing to welcome a storm that would soon wash away every trace of deceit from that house by the sea. Monday morning, sunlight cast a pale glow over Hollow Bay, the scent of salt and cold wind slipping through every crack in the house. Margaret sat in the kitchen listening to the steady rhythm of hammers pounding from the basement below. Derek had hired workers to start building her private room. Each strike echoed through her chest, harsh, hollow, and shameless. Olivia brought out a cup of coffee, trying to smile. "Mom, I think you'll like the new room. There'll be a small window looking out to the backyard. It'll be more convenient." Margaret lifted her gaze, her voice gentle, but her eyes strangely calm. "Do you remember when you were little, you were so afraid of the dark? You slept with me for 5 years straight." Olivia froze. I do. Why, I just find it fascinating," Margaret said softly. "How people grow up and try to lock their own mothers back into that darkness." Olivia stiffened the coffee cup, trembling slightly in her hands. "Mom, please don't say that. I just want everyone to have their own space." "Their own space," Margaret interrupted. "Or just space where you don't have to see me anymore?" The question silenced the kitchen. Olivia opened her mouth to reply, but Derek walked in, wearing his suit jacket, the smell of cologne heavy around him. "Mom, you're taking this too personally. I hired the best workers. The basement will be done in 2 weeks. You can decorate it however you want. Think of it as your own private area." Margaret looked at him calmly. "My private area, or an isolation chamber for someone who's no longer useful? I don't like the way you're talking," Derek said, frowning. "We're only trying to do what's best for you. You're not clever enough to hide your true motives." "Derek," she replied slowly, "and don't confuse kindness with calculation." Derek started to respond, but something in her eyes stopped him. For the first time in that brief moment, he felt a flicker of fear. There was something in the way that 70-year-old woman stood tall, her gaze cold and clear, that made him feel as though he was facing someone he couldn't control. After breakfast, Margaret went upstairs and took the lottery ticket from her purse. The thin paper felt heavy in her hand, as if it carried the weight of her entire life. She opened the window and looked out toward the backyard where the old oak tree Thomas had planted still stood firm against the wind. "You see that, Thomas," she whispered, "they're building a tomb for me while I'm still alive. But it's in this light that I'll rise again." That afternoon, Derek brought a real estate agent to inspect the house. "If we sell this place after the renovation, we could make an extra few $100,000, he said to Olivia loud enough for Margaret to hear. "Your mom will have her own room in the new house. It'll be closer to the city, much more comfortable." From the living room, Margaret looked at them, her lips curling slightly. "Have you included the money I contributed when we bought this house 10 years ago?" Derek froze. "You contributed?" "Yes," she said evenly. "I gave Thomas $20,000 for the down payment. If you're planning to sell, don't forget my share. We should be fair, shouldn't we?" Her tone was calm, but the words made Olivia lower her head, and Derek's face changed color. He forced a laugh. "Of course, Mom, you're just joking." "Yes," she replied. "I'm joking, but this joke will last a while." By late afternoon, the sea began to swell. Margaret sat on the porch under the dimming light, watching the workers pack up and leave. She smiled faintly, an unreadable expression crossing her face. In her coat pocket, the ticket rested quietly hidden, like a blade waiting for the right moment to strike. That night, Derek was on the phone in the living room. "Yes." He said, his voice low but confident. "I'm very close to the money. Just a few more days and it'll all be mine." Margaret stood in the shadow at the top of the stairs, listening. There was no anger left in her, only the stillness of wind before a storm. She turned back to her room, locked the door, and opened an old cabinet. Beneath a pile of papers, she pulled out a folder bearing Thomas's signature, the property agreement he had once drafted with their lawyer, Frank Lawson. "Frank," she murmured, "I think it's time we meet again." Outside, the wind tore at the curtains, and the waves crashed against the rocks like the applause of fate. Inside that house, no one yet realized that the woman they had labeled a burden had just decided to rewrite their story, and this time, she would be the one in control. Rain had been falling since dawn, the droplets beating thickly against the window glass, blurring the line between sea and sky. Margaret slipped on her gray raincoat, took her black umbrella, and stepped out of the house in silence. Every step along the narrow road by Hollow Bay carried the heavy sound of water pooling beneath her shoes. She didn't want Derek or Olivia to know where she was going that morning. They were busy downstairs with the builders supervising the construction of the basement room, just for Mom certain she was only going out for a walk to clear her mind. But this was not an ordinary day. The Hollow Bay Mart convenience store glowed faintly through the rain. Sam, the young clerk, spotted her figure and waved. Mrs. Turner. Out buying tickets in weather like this, Margaret smiled gently and handed over a wrinkled $5 bill. "Old habits die hard, Sam. Give me the same numbers as always." As he printed the ticket, Sam chuckled. "If there's any justice in this universe, it's your turn to win. Justice may come late," she said, her eyes distant, "but when it arrives, it never forgets anyone." The ticket fell into her hand, warm and light, like a fragment of faith. She signed her name Margaret Turner in firm strokes, folded it, and slipped it into her wallet beside Thomas's photo. When she stepped outside, the rain had grown heavier. She didn't hurry home. Instead, she turned onto the steep path leading up to the hilltop cemetery where Thomas rested. The grass on his grave was lush and green, and the wind whispering through the gravestones filled the air with a haunting stillness. Margaret knelt down and placed a red carnation on the stone, the kind of flower Thomas had always loved. "You know," she murmured, "they're building me a room underground. It's damp without light, without a window facing the sea. They say it's for my privacy." She lifted her face as the rain fell on her silver hair, soaking her shoulders. "You once said I was strong, that someday I'd teach them what fairness truly means. I think that day is coming, Thomas." When she returned home, Derek was already waiting on the porch, his arms crossed, face tense. "Where have you been, Mom? I was worried." "Buying a lottery ticket," she said simply. "The habit you told me to give up." He gave a short, dismissive laugh. "What a waste of money. People go their whole lives without ever winning." Margaret looked straight at him, her voice steady. "Sometimes, Derek, what people refuse to believe in is exactly what changes everything." He didn't understand, only shrugged and went back inside. That evening, Olivia came into her mother's room cheerful and excited. "Mom, I did some math. After the basement's done, Derek and I will start redoing the front yard. The house will look so much more upscale. Who knows, when we sell it, you might get to live somewhere even better." Margaret paused her knitting and lifted her eyes. Somewhere better. Or just farther away, Olivia's smile faded. "Mom, please don't say that. I just want you to be comfortable." "Comfortable?" Margaret asked softly. "Does that mean not having to see me every morning, or the quiet you need so you won't have to feel guilty?" Olivia stood there, her cheeks flushed with a mix of shame and frustration. "You're exaggerating, Mom." "No." Margaret said, her voice calm and unwavering. "I'm only telling the truth. But you know, sometimes the truth is the hardest thing to face." That night, the wind howled and rain lashed against the roof. Derek and Olivia had gone to bed early after arguing over renovation costs. Margaret sat alone by the window, watching the dim lights shimmer across the gray sea. She took the lottery ticket from her purse and placed it on her palm, the familiar numbers whispering to her. She thought back to her years as a teacher, the poor children who came to art class in worn clothes, their small hands gripping paintbrushes with a pure, innocent joy she always believed was the truest kind of beauty. She had spent most of her savings keeping that art program alive for 10 years. Olivia had never known, and Derek never cared. Lightning flashed over the horizon, illuminating her face, serene, but burning with a quiet fire in her eyes. "Thomas," she whispered, "if anyone up there can hear me, let these numbers speak for me, not for the money, but for justice." When the clock struck 11, Margaret turned off the light, walked to her bed, and slipped the ticket back into her wallet. A faint smile crossed her lips. For the first time in many years, she fell asleep peacefully, without dreams. Somewhere out in the storm, fate was preparing a gift for the woman the world had mistaken for fragile. But in truth, she'd only been waiting for the right moment to rise again. The next morning, the rain had stopped. Sunlight broke through a thin layer of mist, spreading across the sea like a shimmering sheet of silver. Margaret woke in silence, her heart pounding fast for reasons she couldn't explain. A feeling vague yet undeniable made her reach for the small radio on the bedside table. The voice of a female announcer filled the still air. Last night's lottery results. The winning numbers are 7, 12, 22, 31, and 18. Margaret froze. Her hand tightened around the cup she was holding, tea spilling over the rim. The entire world seemed to stop in that single instant. The jackpot prize is $60 million. The words crashed through the room like thunder. She stood up, her heartbeat racing. Those numbers, each one a memory, a moment from her life, now glowed on the small TV screen in the living room. Trembling, she reached for her wallet and pulled out the ticket. The printed numbers matched perfectly, every single one. $60 million. For several seconds, she stood still, listening to the sound of the waves and her own breathing. There was no wild joy, no scream of disbelief, only a silence so deep it felt sacred. She sat down, sunlight falling softly across her wrinkled but radiant face. A tear rolled down her cheek, not because of the money, but because of what it meant, a quiet form of justice that had finally opened its eyes. "Thomas," she whispered, "you were right. When justice comes, it comes completely." The moment stretched endlessly until a small noise in the hallway startled her. Olivia. Her daughter shuffled in hair messy, still in her robe, yawning. "You're up early, Mom. What are you watching so seriously?" Margaret quickly closed her wallet and said calmly, "Nothing, just the news." Olivia sat down, scrolling through her phone. Within a minute, she gasped, her eyes widening. "Oh my God, Derek, come here." From upstairs, Derek stumbled down, half asleep. "What's going on?" Olivia thrust her phone toward him, her voice trembling. "Last night's lottery results, their mom's numbers, the same ones she always plays. Oh my God, we won." The room seemed to explode. Derek froze, then his eyes lit up like a man who had just seen buried treasure. "Are you sure every single number?" Olivia cried, turning to her mother with a bright, trembling smile. "Mom, do you still have the ticket? Oh my God, you're so lucky." Margaret said nothing, only nodded slightly. Derek rushed forward, his voice urgent. "Mom, let me see the ticket quick. We need to verify it right away. $60 million, do you understand? This is once in a lifetime." Slowly, Margaret took the ticket from her wallet and placed it on the table. Their eyes clung to it like moths drawn to a flame. Olivia reached out with shaking hands while Derek leaned in, eyes hungry and gleaming. "Unbelievable," Olivia whispered. $60 million. Derek, we can buy a new house, a new car, send the kids to international school." Margaret watched them, a faint smile touching her lips. "It's good that you both know how to dream." Derek lifted the ticket under the light, his tone changing, flat, businesslike. "Mom, you bought this using money from the family fund, right? Which means this ticket belongs to all of us." Margaret looked up, her eyes unusually bright. "You just said, belongs to all of us." "Yes," he said firmly. "You live here, all expenses are shared. Naturally, the winnings should be shared too." She studied him quietly. No anger, only thoughtfulness. "Do you know whose name is signed on the back of that ticket, Derek?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said slowly, her voice low but unyielding, "the name on this ticket is Margaret Turner. One person, me." Olivia's eyes widened. Derek's face went pale. For a moment, the entire house seemed to lose sound. Then Olivia forced an awkward laugh. "Well, of course you bought it, but you're not planning to keep all of it, right?" Margaret looked at her daughter. "When did I ever say that?" The air thickened. Derek set the ticket down, forcing a polite smile, though his eyes gleamed with greed. "Mom, I understand you're excited, but this is a big matter. You can't handle it alone. I can help you meet with a lawyer, plan investments taxes." "A lawyer," Margaret interrupted with a quiet laugh. "You're right, Derek. I will meet with someone, but not to talk about investments, to talk about justice." Then she picked up the ticket, slipped it back into her wallet, and said calmly, "Now I'll make breakfast. What would you two like to eat?" Olivia sank into her chair, staring at her husband, whispering, I don't understand. How can she be so calm? Derek looked toward the stairs where Margaret was walking up her steps, steady her back straight and proud. In that moment, he didn't realize that the woman he had always dismissed had just become the most powerful person in that house, and he was only beginning to understand that he was living inside a nightmare written by her own hand. In the bright kitchen filled with the scent of freshly brewed coffee, Margaret quietly sliced bread, but her ears caught every whisper from Derek and Olivia in the living room. "You have to do something," Derek Olivia said urgently. "If Mom keeps the ticket, she'll go collect the money herself." 60 million, do you understand? Derek lowered his voice, trying to control his irritation. "Calm down, she's old, she doesn't know how to handle it. We just need to convince her to sign the authorization form. I can tell her it's a required procedure, and if she refuses, then let me handle it. I know how to talk to stubborn people." Margaret set the knife down, wiped her hands on her apron, and stepped out. Her gaze made them both flinch. "Who are you planning to talk to, Derek?" He forced a smile. "Oh, it's nothing, Mom. We were just talking about how to help you claim your prize safely." "Yes," she said softly. "Safety is always the most important thing." She calmly pulled out a chair and sat down, looking straight at him. "Derek, do you know why I chose those numbers?" He shrugged. "Probably just out of habit." "No," she replied, her eyes distant. "Each number is a memory, a lesson." 7. The day your father proposed to me. 12, the day my daughter was born. 22, the day your father died. 31, the first house we built together. And 18, the age my daughter left home chasing her dreams. Olivia lowered her head, her eyes glistening for a brief moment. But Derek cut in coldly. "So what you mean, Mom, is that those $60 million belong to those memories?" Margaret smiled faintly. "No, Derek. They belong to the one who hasn't forgotten what they mean." He stayed silent for a moment, then spoke in a softer tone. "Mom, I understand you're emotional, but let's be realistic. That's a lot of money, and it can cause trouble. The media strangers, taxes. You can't handle all that on your own. So what do you want? All you have to do is sign the form I prepared. I'll handle everything for you. Make sure it's all legal. Once the money comes in, we split it evenly, you, me, and Olivia." Margaret set her teacup down, her eyes calm but her voice sharp as a blade. "Could you repeat that sentence?" "Split it evenly," he said, forcing a smile. "Split it evenly," she repeated. "Does that mean I'm splitting my effort, my tears, my years with you, or are you splitting your greed with me?" Derek froze. Olivia hurried to intervene. "Mom, please don't misunderstand. Derek's only trying to help. He knows about the law. He knows how to deal with the bank." Margaret looked at her daughter and spoke slowly. "Olivia, do you know what your father once said about intelligent people? He said intelligent people use their knowledge to protect the weak, not to exploit them." The room grew heavy. Derek shot up, his face red. "Fine if you don't want to cooperate. Do it your way. But don't blame me when everything falls apart." Margaret tilted her head slightly, her tone calm. "You think I'm afraid of chaos. I've lived through war, through illness, through the death of the only man I ever loved. Nothing is more chaotic than that Derek." He was speechless, staring at her like she was someone he no longer knew. When Derek stormed out, slamming the door, Olivia stayed her hands trembling. "Mom," she whispered, "he just worries about you. He's afraid you'll be deceived." Margaret placed her hand over her daughter's, warm yet firm. "No one can deceive someone who has lost all illusions, Olivia. Only those who still trust the wrong people get hurt." Her daughter bowed her head, tears falling onto her mother's hand. "I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, dear." Margaret said gently, "Sometimes people have to lose what's most precious to understand what's real." Later that afternoon, Derek returned looking composed. He smirked and held up his phone. "Good news, Mom. The local paper just announced that the $60 million ticket still hasn't been claimed. We have time. Tomorrow I'll drive you to Desmond City to submit it. But remember, you need to let me handle things." Standing on the stairs, Margaret looked at him as if he were a child pretending to be a man. "All right," she said softly, but with a hint of warning. "Tomorrow we'll go. But remember, Derek, never think you can make decisions for me. My life has been longer than you can imagine." When he went upstairs, Margaret returned to the dining table where the golden light of sunset poured through the window. She opened her wallet, looked at the ticket once more, and smiled faintly. Not because of the $60 million, but because she had finally seen the true faces of those who thought they held power. And as the darkness settled, Margaret Turner knew that the dawn of tomorrow would not just mark a new day, but the beginning of the justice she had waited for her entire life. The next morning, the sky was strangely clear. Thin clouds drifted slowly across the pale blue-gray horizon, reflecting on the calm surface of the sea. Derek woke up earlier than usual, his shirt perfectly ironed, his tie straight, the look of a man about to sign $1 million contract. Olivia hurriedly prepared breakfast, muttering to herself as she calculated the cost of the dream house she had been eyeing online. Margaret sat at the dining table, quietly sipping her tea. The morning light fell softly on her face, highlighting a calmness that seemed almost unreadable. "Are you ready?" Mom Derek asked, trying to sound gentle. "I called the lottery office in Desmond City. They said to bring your ID and the original ticket. You just need to sign. I'll take care of the rest." Margaret smiled and nodded lightly. "I'm always ready, Derek." Olivia sat down beside her, holding her mother's hand, her voice soft. "Mom, I just want everything to go smoothly today. No more misunderstandings, okay? Don't worry, my dear," Margaret said quietly today. "Everything will be clearer than ever." On the drive there, Derek couldn't stop talking about his grand plans for the future. "I'm thinking of starting my own company. With $60 million, we can invest, buy real estate, and even open a charity to build our image. The media will love it, and you'll be the honorary founder, Mom." Margaret looked out the window, her tone even. "That sounds nice, Derek. But have you ever thought that money can make people lose their image faster than fame can build it?" He gave a dry laugh. "You worry too much, Mom. Nowadays, anyone with money has everything." "No, Derek," she replied slowly. "Only those with conscience have everything. Money, it only measures the depth of a person's heart." He went silent, avoiding her gaze. The car sped along the coastal road, and when the sign for the Desmond City Lottery office appeared ahead, no one spoke another word. Inside, the air was bright and smelled faintly of new paper and coffee. The receptionist smiled warmly. "Congratulations, you're Mrs. Turner, the winner of the $60 million ticket right." Margaret nodded and took the ticket from her wallet, placing it gently on the counter. Derek stood beside her, trying to remain composed, but his eyes gleamed with excitement. "We just need to verify your documents," the receptionist said. "Please sign here for confirmation." Margaret picked up the pen, but before she signed, she turned to Derek. "Are you sure you want me to sign this?" He laughed, his voice impatient. "Of course, go on, Mom. What are you waiting for?" The pen glided across the paper in one firm stroke. The receptionist checked it carefully and nodded. "Everything's valid. Congratulations, Mrs. Turner. You are now officially the winner." Derek held his breath, his fists tightening. "So? When will she get the money?" he asked quickly. "We'll contact you in the next few days to discuss how you'd like to receive it, either as a lump sum or annual payments." Margaret smiled politely and thanked her. She took back the ticket and confirmation papers, placing them carefully in her wallet. As they stepped outside, Derek could barely contain his excitement. "See, Mom, everything went perfectly. Tonight we'll celebrate. I told you, you just needed to let me handle it." Margaret stopped and looked at him in the middle of the parking lot. "Did you just say, Derek, yes, our family?" He replied. "Family." She repeated, her voice low and deep like the sound of waves. "Do you know what family really means? It means sharing, being together." "No, Derek," she said softly but firmly. "It means respect, and that's something you've never learned." He froze. Olivia looked between them nervously, her voice trembling. "Mom, please don't talk like that in front of people." Margaret turned to her daughter, her gaze kind but weary. "I'm not saying this to offend anyone, dear. I'm only telling the truth." That afternoon they returned home. Derek opened a bottle of champagne, turned the music up loud, and started calling everyone he knew. "We did it," he shouted. 60 million, our lives will never be the same." His friends poured in to celebrate, laughing and drinking. Olivia glowed like a bride, radiant with joy, while Margaret sat quietly in the corner, her tea growing cold. The cheers and laughter reminded her of Thomas's funeral, so many people, so much noise, yet so much emptiness. Back then, she was the only one who understood the real meaning of loss, and today she was the only one who understood the true value of victory. As night fell, Derek, drunk with wine and triumph, put a hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry, Mom, I'll use this money wisely. I'll take care of you for the rest of your life." Margaret looked at him, her voice soft but clear with every word. "I don't need anyone to take care of me, Derek. I only need someone who's grateful for what I've done. But perhaps that's even rarer than $60 million. Derek gave an awkward laugh, thinking she was joking. But when Margaret stood up, her eyes were cold and sharp as the moonlight streaming through the window. "Do you really think this money will belong to you, Derek?" she said slowly. "You're wrong. The game has only just begun." And in the stillness of the night, as the seaside house echoed with the rhythm of the waves, Margaret Turner smiled the smile of a woman who knew victory was already in her hands, waiting only for the right moment to reveal her cards. The next morning, the faint scent of champagne still lingered in the air. The house was a mess after the celebration, shattered glasses scattered across the floor, chairs tipped over. Derek was passed out on the sofa, his shirt wrinkled and stained, while Olivia had fallen asleep at the dining table, her head resting on a pile of unpaid bills. Amid the chaos, Margaret walked downstairs, dressed neatly in a gray robe, her expression calm and cold. She quietly began clearing the bottles and glasses one by one without saying a word. When Derek finally woke up, he saw his mother-in-law holding the morning paper, the bold headline reading, $60 million winner has yet to reveal identity. He yawned and chuckled. "They're talking about you, Mom. Sooner or later, you'll have to go public." Margaret didn't look up. "Yes, but not today. There's something else I need to do first." "What could possibly be more important than $60 million? Derek asked with a mocking tone. She put down the newspaper, her gaze steady and sharp. "Protecting something more valuable than money, dignity." Derek laughed, thinking she was joking. "Dignity doesn't pay bills. Mom money does." "That's true," Margaret said slowly. "But it's exactly that kind of thinking that keeps you poor. Not poor in money, but poor in heart." He froze for a moment, then stormed out, slamming the door. Olivia came over, her voice soft. "Mom, please don't say things that hurt his pride. He just wants to help." Margaret looked at her daughter with a faint, sorrowful smile. "Olivia, have you forgotten who I am? The woman who raised you with 2 jobs, who stayed awake night after night for 10 years just so you could study. And now your husband thinks I don't even know how to protect my own money." Olivia bit her lip, tears welling in her eyes. "Mom, I just don't want things to get out of control." Margaret gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Don't be afraid, my dear. Everything is going exactly as it should. I've had control of it from the very beginning." By noon, Derek returned looking entirely different. He carried a stack of documents and smiled confidently. "Mom, I talked to a lawyer. He said we need to open a joint account to handle the taxes. You just need to sign here." Margaret took the papers and flipped through a few pages. "Whose names are on the contract?" "Yours, mine, and Olivia's," he said. "It's a co-ownership agreement. You won't have to worry about anything." "Co-ownership," she repeated, her tone dry. "That means I'm giving you both the power to make decisions on my behalf, doesn't it?" Derek forced a smile. "It's the safest way." Margaret raised her head, her smile thin as a thread. "You know, Derek, in art, a single wrong brushstroke can ruin an entire painting. In real life, one wrong signature can destroy a life." He tried to hide his discomfort. "Are you saying you don't trust me, no, Derek?" She replied softly but firmly. "I'm not saying I don't trust you. I'm saying I'm certain." Olivia nervously stepped in. "Mom, please stop being so harsh. He's just trying to help." Help? Margaret looked straight at her daughter. "If this is what you call help, what do you think the person being used would call it?" She folded the papers neatly and handed them back to Derek. "Thank you, but I have my own lawyer. I'll meet him tomorrow to discuss this." Derek frowned. "Your own lawyer? Since when?" Margaret turned away, her voice calm. "Since the day I learned to trust justice more than promises." That afternoon she drove away from the house. The ocean shimmered in the rearview mirror. Inside her wallet, the lottery ticket rested beside an old business card, Frank Lawson, Thomas's lawyer. She whispered, "Frank, it's time to ask for your help again, not to protect the money, but to protect the last piece of dignity a mother has left." As her car disappeared down the coastal road, the house behind her still glowed with light, but those lights only reflected the chaos about to erupt. Because Margaret Turner, the woman they thought had surrendered, had just made her move in the final game. And in this game, she held the white pieces ready to deliver checkmate. Late in the afternoon, the sky was covered with a heavy layer of gray clouds. Margaret drove along the winding road that hugged the cliffside. The sound of waves crashing against the rocks below echoed rhythmically like the heartbeat of the sea. At the third turn, a sign came into view, Lawson and Associates. She stopped the car, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. Frank Lawson's office was just as she remembered it, the scent of old wood mixed with a faint trace of coffee. Frank, now in his 70s, still carried the same calm demeanor. He stood up and smiled warmly when he saw her. "Margaret Turner, it's been years since I last saw you." "Yes," she replied, placing her purse on the desk. "And this might be the last time, Frank. But I need your help with something important." Frank gestured for her to sit, his voice steady and kind. "I assume this has something to do with that lottery ticket." "The whole town's been talking about—" Margaret smiled faintly. "You're as sharp as ever. Yes, it's about that, but not just about money, Frank. It's about family." She told him everything from Thomas's passing to moving in with her daughter, to how Derek had turned her into little more than a housekeeper, the so-called rental agreement, and finally the winning ticket worth $60 million. Frank listened quietly, his eyes darkening with concern. "Thomas feared this might happen," he said at last. "Before he passed, he asked me to create an emergency fund, $500,000, placed in your name. It was to be used only if you ever faced hardship or exploitation." Margaret froze. "He never told me that." "Because he hoped you'd never need it," Frank replied softly. "But I think that time has come. I also have something else, records of Derek and Olivia's finances. Thomas suspected they were in debt, and he wasn't wrong." Frank opened a thick folder and set it before her. Cold, hard numbers filled the pages: overdue credit cards, 2 outstanding bank loans, and a failed investment contract under Derek's company name. "They're drowning in debt, Margaret," he said. "If you sign anything jointly with them, they'll drag you down with them." She was silent for a long moment, then said quietly, "Thank you, Frank. I know what I need to do now. You're going to?" he asked. "Meet them tonight," she replied, "and let them hear the truth from me." Frank looked at her with a mix of admiration and concern. "You've always been strong, Margaret. But be careful. Greed makes people do foolish things." She nodded gently, her voice calm but edged with steel. "I've lived with that greed for 2 years, Frank. I know exactly how it breathes." When she left the office, a light rain had begun to fall. Margaret stepped out onto the porch and lifted her face, letting the cold drops touch her skin. It felt as if each raindrop was washing away years of endurance. She took out her phone and dialed Olivia's number. "Darling, make sure everyone's home tonight. I want to talk." Olivia hesitated. "Mom, what's going on?" Derek said, "I know what he said. Just tell him 7 o'clock. A family talk." She hung up and looked out toward the sea, now rough and restless. Everything inside her felt suddenly clear. No more hesitation, no more fear. Thomas had left her a light to follow long before he died. Now it was time to turn it on. On the way home, the wind blew hard, making the carnations in her car tremble slightly. Margaret gripped the steering wheel tighter and whispered, "Frank was right, Thomas. Greed blinds people, but tonight they'll see with the light of truth." And amid the sound of rain hitting the windshield, she felt within herself a quiet yet powerful force, the strength of a mother once underestimated, now ready to turn her pain into the blade of justice. That night, the house on the cliff was dimly lit by the soft golden glow of the fireplace. Derek had set the table as if for a small celebration: red wine candles, roasted meat. The atmosphere was so artificial that Margaret sensed it the moment she stepped in. Olivia stood by the doorway, her hands clasped tightly together, her expression anxious. "Mom," she said softly, "we thought we'd have dinner together and talk in a calmer way." "Yes," Derek added with his usual forced smile. "No need for tension, Mom. I want us to clear up all the misunderstandings, too." Margaret nodded, set her purse on a chair, and said good, because tonight we're really going to make things clear. She sat down, unlocked her bag, and took out a stack of documents. The sound of paper hitting the wooden table was sharp and dry. "These are copies from Frank Lawson's law office," she said evenly. "He reminded me that Thomas created a protection fund, $500,000, in my name. He also kept your financial records." Derek, who had been pouring wine, froze mid-motion. "Financial records? What do you mean, debts?" Margaret replied, her gaze fixed on him. $47,000 in credit cards, $32,000 in mortgage payments, $18,000 in car loans. And your company, Derek, has been losing money for 8 months straight. Olivia gasped, covering her mouth. "Oh God," Derek forced a smirk, trying to recover. "So what, you've been invading our privacy?" "No," she said slowly. "Your father hired someone to investigate before he died because he feared exactly what's happening now, you two taking advantage of me." The room fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. Margaret laid another sheet of paper on the table. "Here's my own record," she continued. "Over the past 2 years, I've paid $15,600 in living expenses, spent more than 1,000 hours watching your children, done 800 loads of laundry, prepared 300 meals, and what did I get in return? A basement room." Olivia broke into tears. "Mom, I didn't mean to. No need to explain." Margaret interrupted, her voice calm but cold as steel. "I understand. When people get used to receiving, they forget gratitude. Derek slammed his wine glass onto the floor shards, scattering across the room. Enough. Who do you think you're lecturing? Without us, you wouldn't even have a roof over your head. Margaret rose to her feet, her voice low but resonant. No, Derek. Without me, you wouldn't even have a life to live. This house, the first down payment, came from my contribution to Thomas. I let you live here because I believed in family, and that belief made me a victim. Olivia sobbed while Derek's face reddened, his fists clenching. So what do you want, money? You already have $60 million, don't you? Why humiliate us? Margaret stared at him for a long moment. No, Derek, I don't want to humiliate you. I want to teach you something money can't buy: shame. She gathered the papers, placed them neatly back in her bag, and spoke slowly. Tomorrow I'll be moving out. I've already placed a deposit on an apartment at Maple Hill. It's near the sea, filled with sunlight, and has no basement. And from today on, I won't pay another cent for this house. Olivia rushed forward, grabbing her mother's hand, her voice breaking. Mom, please don't go. I was wrong. I was stupid. Please stay. Margaret brushed her daughter's hair, gently, her touch as soft as a breeze. You weren't wrong, Olivia. You just forgot how to face the truth. Now look at what the man you chose has turned you into. Derek stepped back, his face pale. Margaret looked at them both and spoke her final words. Your father used to say that justice delayed is justice perfected, and tonight I think he's smiling. Then Margaret turned and walked through the doorway. The sound of rain began to fall on the porch, blending with the crashing waves below. Inside the house, Derek sank to the floor while Olivia buried her face in her arms. And the woman walking away, her back straight, her step steady, knew that after 2 years of being dismissed and disrespected, she had finally reclaimed everything: her freedom, her dignity, and her faith in herself. The next morning, Hollow Bay shimmered under the early sunlight. The scent of salt and sea breeze filled Margaret's new apartment in Maple Hill. The room was spacious and bright white curtains swaying gently by the balcony. She set her cup of tea on the windowsill and listened to the distant sound of the waves. For the first time in many years, she felt truly at peace. The phone rang. On the screen appeared the name Frank Lawson. She picked up his warm, steady voice coming through. Margaret, the local paper, just ran a story. They want to interview you, the woman who won $60 million but chose a simple life. Margaret smiled softly. If they want to talk about money, I have nothing to say. But if they want to talk about justice, perhaps I'll share a few words. Frank chuckled. I suspect whatever you say will make quite a few people think twice. After ending the call, she gazed out the window. Across the bay, Olivia's old house was barely visible through the mist. She knew they were in trouble. Derek was being pursued by the bank for unpaid debts, and Olivia had sold her jewelry to make ends meet. The news didn't bring her joy, only the quiet sense that balance had finally been restored. That afternoon, Olivia appeared at her door, her face pale and drawn dark circles under her eyes. Mom, I'm sorry. Margaret looked at her for a long moment, then opened the door and gestured for her to sit. You don't need to apologize to me. You need to apologize to yourself for forgetting who you are. Olivia lowered her head. Derek's gone. He took all our savings. I have nothing left. Not quite. Margaret said gently. You still have time to start over, and you still have me. Those words broke what little strength Olivia had left, and she wept uncontrollably. Margaret pulled her close, stroking her messy hair. I don't hate you, Olivia. I only hate the weakness that made you let someone else control your life. I know that now, Mom, she sobbed. I just want a chance to make things right. There's always a chance, Margaret replied, but you must learn to take it for yourself. Not wait for someone to give it to you. As the evening descended, they walked together along the shoreline. The sand was warm beneath their feet, and the sea breeze lifted Margaret's silver hair. Olivia walked silently beside her. "Mom," she asked quietly, "what will you do with the money?" Margaret smiled. "I've spoken to Frank. We're going to start the Turner Foundation to support older women who've been abandoned or mistreated by their children. I want to turn my pain into something that can help others stand again." Olivia gripped her mother's hand tightly. "I want to help you do that." Margaret nodded, her eyes glowing with a gentle light. "Good. Start by learning to live with kindness again." The ocean wind blew stronger, carrying with it the distant sound of church bells. In that moment, Margaret felt Thomas smiling somewhere above the blue sky, not because of the fortune, but because the woman he loved had finally reclaimed the two things most precious of all, freedom and self-respect. A week later, news of Margaret Turner spread across Hollow Bay. The newspapers called her the woman who won $60 million and chose justice over luxury. A photograph of her standing in front of her small seaside apartment, silver hair blowing in the wind, a calm smile on her face, appeared on the front page of the Hollow Bay Chronicle. Locals began calling her Mrs. Turner of Hope. Frank Lawson visited that morning carrying a folder filled with documents, the official papers for the Turner Foundation. "You are now officially the founder," he said proudly. "I've never seen anyone turn pain into kindness so quickly." Margaret set down the teapot and smiled gently. "Nothing about this was quick, Frank. I just waited for justice for so long that when it finally arrived, I didn't want to waste a single minute." That afternoon, she and Olivia visited the community center. The older women there greeted them with a mix of curiosity and admiration. One of them asked, "Is it true you were once kicked out of your own home?" Margaret nodded. "Yes, but what matters isn't that they made me leave, it's that I learned how to stand up and walk out on my own." Olivia looked at her mother, her heart swelling with a mix of admiration and shame. She still carried guilt for what she had done, but each time she heard her mother speak, it felt like something inside her was being cleansed. After the talk, she helped Margaret organize the foundation's files. "Mom," she said softly, "I think Dad would be so proud." Margaret looked up, a faintly wistful smile on her lips. He always believed that justice never dies, it only falls asleep. And maybe now it's awake again. That evening, the sea wind blew hard, carrying with it the salty scent of the ocean. Margaret sat at her desk and opened her mail. One envelope had no name. Inside was an old photograph Derek, Olivia, and their two children laughing on the beach taken years ago. On the back, scrawled in uneven handwriting, were the words, "I was wrong." There was no signature, but she recognized Derek's writing instantly. She stared at the photo for a long time before placing it on the table. There was no anger, no satisfaction, just a quiet sadness. At last she whispered, "He's learned his lesson." Late, but not too late. The next morning, Margaret stepped out onto her balcony. The sunrise spilled gold across the sea. Olivia brought out 2 cups of coffee and handed one to her. "Mom, the foundation just received another donation from a businessman in Portland. Everything's going so well." Margaret smiled, taking the cup, her voice low and steady. "That's wonderful. We can't change the past, but we can use the present to save someone else from the mistakes we once made." The wind lifted their hair, and the morning sun glowed in her deep, steady eyes. For the first time since the day Thomas passed away, Margaret Turner felt whole, as if her life had finally closed one long storm to make way for a season of peace. On a late winter afternoon, Hollow Bay was bathed in a pale golden hue. The sea lay strangely still, with only the cries of seagulls echoing across the open sky. Margaret sat on the wooden bench by her porch, holding the notebook of the Turner Foundation. The gentle breeze flipped through the pages, carrying the scent of paper and sea salt. Inside were the names of the first women the foundation had helped, mothers who had been abandoned widows, who had lost their homes. Each name represented a story, a new beginning. Olivia stepped outside and draped a shawl over her mother's shoulders. "It's getting cold, Mom," she said softly. Margaret looked at her with warmth in her eyes. "I'm not cold, Olivia, maybe because my heart has finally found peace. I just got an email from Frank," Olivia continued. "A news channel in Portland wants to invite you for a live interview about the foundation. They want to hear your story from being abandoned by your children to becoming a symbol of resilience." Margaret smiled gently, setting the notebook down. "If they truly want to listen, I'll tell it. But not for fame. I just want those who are suffering to know that justice always comes as long as we still believe in it." In the distance, the sun was slowly sinking, painting the shore in shades of crimson. Olivia sat beside her, resting her head on her mother's shoulder. "Mom, I think I finally understand what Dad meant, that true love never needs to be begged for. It exists in action and sacrifice." Margaret stroked her daughter's hair, her voice low and tender, and in the courage to rise after being betrayed. They sat in silence for a while. The only sound was the rhythm of the waves, steady and timeless, like a lullaby of the sea. After a moment, Olivia asked quietly, "Do you ever regret leaving that house?" "No." Margaret replied, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "If I hadn't left, you would never have seen what real love looks like. Sometimes loss is God's way of giving us a gift." Olivia squeezed her mother's hand, a small smile forming on her lips. As twilight faded, Margaret stood and walked closer to the edge of the porch. The sea stretched endlessly before her, each wave glimmering like silver under the last light of day. She took a deep breath, feeling a lightness spreading through her chest. "Thomas," she whispered, "the justice you believed in has arrived. Slowly, yes, but beautifully enough to never be forgotten." Olivia looked at her mother, her heart overflowing with emotion. "I promise I'll continue the foundation no matter where you are." Margaret turned, took her daughter's hand, and said firmly, "I know." Because in the end, we've learned that love, when it's true, is the only form of salvation. The ocean wind swept through her silver hair, carrying the scent of salt and wildflowers. The daylight faded, but inside the small house, a warm, golden light glowed softly. And in that light, Margaret Turner, the woman once dismissed as worthless, had become a symbol of strength and compassion. She closed the notebook, smiling, her voice gentle like a final message. If you believe justice can fall asleep, then wake it with your own story. Share it, leave a comment, and tell me where you found your own justice. A simple ending like the whisper of waves at the horizon. And so the journey of Margaret Turner came to a close, not with applause, but with the quiet awakening of the human heart.